Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this late afternoon session called Why Lease Here, Pay Here Works. My name is Mark Dubois. I am a 20-group moderator specializing in Lease Here, Pay Here, and Buy Here, Pay Here. And I also do consulting and training for Buy Here, Pay Here, and Lease Here, Pay Here dealers across the country. You know, the only thing worse than being the last presentation before the bar opens is being the last presentation before the day closes, and I get the special distinction of being both. So thank you for sticking it out and coming to this afternoon's presentation. If you're like me, I'm tired. It's been a long couple of days, but we've got some good content here. Let me just do a quick informal survey and ask, show of hands, how many are here to NIADA convention for the first time? Wow, that's a really big percentage. Awesome, and welcome. I hope you're getting lots out of it so far, and we'll continue to get lots out of it before we close off tomorrow. Is that it? Tomorrow? Yeah. How many of you, show of hands, first time to Las Vegas? A few. Kind of crazy city. For those of you that are here again, welcome back. There's always lots to do. Okay, so let's take a look at our presentation this afternoon, and I wanted to let you know that when they approached me about doing this session on Lease Here, Pay Here, I decided to break it into two parts. Part one will be, I'm going to call it a 30,000-foot overview of Lease Here, Pay Here, what works, what doesn't work, some of the advantages and disadvantages. And then tomorrow, as part two of this segment, we're going to have a dealer panel with three very distinguished, three very experienced Lease Here, Pay Here dealers for you to ask your tough questions. And so these dealers are going to be available to as a panel tomorrow at 9:45 to 10:45 in Venetian A. Is that this room? Are we in A? No, we're in D. So it's down the hall a little bit. But make a point, if you get anything out of this afternoon's session, tomorrow's session is going to be your chance to say, hey, I don't know enough about this, or I'd like to ask a question about that. Ask the tough question. So I'll look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning as well. Okay, the other thing I wasn't clear on when they asked me to do this session was, what is the audience going to be? So I'm going to do another informal survey and just ask you to hold your hands up in the air for a count of 3, because I want the other people in the room to look around and see what the profile of the group is. So to start with, how many in the room, show of hands, are currently doing consumer leasing or Lease Here, Pay Here? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so a few. Good, thank you. Second is, how many are doing consumer financing, Buy Here, Pay Here financing? Wow, a bigger percentage. Okay, that's really good. And how about an independent dealer looking around, maybe thinking, exploring the idea of a Lease Here, Pay Here business model, either a change or a new? Okay, good. So that helps me gauge where I'm going to go with this presentation and what I'm going to emphasize. Capital providers for Lease Here, Pay Here dealers. Anyone in the room? Oh, one here. What is the name of the company? What's it called? Okay, good. So there are a couple of companies that are providing capital. You've heard one, Core Acceptance. As you'll see in our presentation, one of the challenges in Lease Here, Pay Here is finding capital. So I want to be able to address the people that are in that arena and identify them. Next, dealer management software provider for specializing in Lease Here, Pay Here business model. Anybody in the room? Okay, so they're still in the trade show. We do have Lease Here, Pay Here software providers, so we want to knock that question off the list right away. And then finally, anybody in the room that specializes in Lease Here, Pay Here from a certified accountant point of view? Okay, 1, 2, good. So that's important also. I want you to just raise your hands again, look around, seek these people out when you're at the trade show, because there's a lot of things beyond just this presentation that you're going to need to know to make an informed decision about your Lease Here, Pay Here business model. obviously software, capital, accounting, and taxation, et cetera, et cetera. So we've got that covered off. Let's move on to some of the objectives that I want to cover off here. So I anticipated that there'd probably be a blend of buy here, pay here, looking at lease here, pay here, or dealers that maybe aren't in buy here, pay here, looking at lease here, pay here. So fortunately, I've got a comparison of what are the similarities between buy here, pay here, and lease here, pay here. What are the differences? Some key drivers to success in those business models. And then finally, how to maximize the business results. And that part will focus primarily on lease here, pay here. So let's start with what I call primary contrast. 30,000 foot level. What are sort of the major differences between buy here, pay here, and lease here, pay here? And these aren't in any particular order. First is the vehicle title. The title of the vehicle, when you're in a lease here, pay here business model, stays in the name of the company, leasing company. In a buy here, pay here business model, the title of the vehicle is in the consumer's name. So what impact does that have? Well, when we look at repossessions, if the title is in your name or your company, repossessing vehicles generally is a little easier for that reason. In a buy here, pay here business model, again, I'll say depending on what state you're in, sometimes you have something we call a right to cure, which means you've got to give the customer a period of time to cure their debt before you can repossess the vehicle. So a small difference there in terms of ownership of the vehicle and your entitlement for repossession. When it comes to what is the asset in a lease or pay here business model, the vehicle is the asset. It's on the books as an asset. In a buy here, pay here business model, the actual stream of payments that you're collecting, the receivables are the asset. So another fairly major contrast between the two business models. These will play out during the course of the presentation as it impacts cash flow, as it impacts taxation, as it impacts paying your sales tax, etc. And so I'm just putting these up on the board as sort of talking points right now. Another major contrast between the two is residual value. In a buy here, pay here business model, there is no residual. You're taking the amount financed and you're driving it right down to a zero balance, and the customer's hopefully paid off by that point. In a lease here, pay here business model, we have a residual value, which means that you're only financing, leasing, the difference between the starting point and whatever that balance will be, residual value. Generally, it's got to be somewhere in the range of 10 to 20%, depending on the term of the lease. So when it comes to residual values, one of the marketing tools that lease or pay here dealers have an advantage is that they can put you in the same car for less payment because you're not financing that residual value, or they can put you in more car for the same payment or less pay, or same payment because again you've got that residual value portion that you're not financing. Little details, but they all sort of start to add up when you look at the big picture. Profit realized. A big one in buy here, pay here. So when you price a car for sale, you take the cost of that car plus your reconditioning, you add on your gross profit $4,000 or $5,000, and you're going to sell that car for $9,000 or $10,000. You recognize that profit up front, and you're not collecting that profit until you've finally got that note paid off. So from a profit point of view, it looks really attractive, but you've got to collect that profit through the term of the loan. We'll get into charge-offs a little later. But in a lease or pay here business model, you recognize that profit as it's collected. When we show you the payment streams on our cash flow example up here in a little bit, you'll see how the cash flow and the profitability comes in to your business. And although on the books, from a profit point of view, it doesn't look quite as sexy compared to a buy here, pay here business model, it probably is a little more realistic when you look at how it plays out over the term of a contract. Next, sales tax payable. Again, this is state specific and depending on your state, so I call them tax-friendly states or not. If your state permits you to pay your sales tax as you collect the money, that would be a lease here, pay here favorable state. Whereas buy here, pay here, when you sell that vehicle, you're paying that tax all up front on the sales price. So this element, or this number 6, has a huge impact on cash flow. And one of the reasons that dealers look at lease here, pay here is that very reason. It's a much more favorable cash flow model. Next, payment structure. So let's suppose we have a $400 payment. In a buy here, pay here language, that payment is made up of principal and interest. So X percentage of that payment goes to paying down the principal on the note. X percentage of that payment goes to collecting interest or earning interest. In a lease here, pay here scenario, same format, different words. You've got a portion of that payment is going to depreciation to pay down that asset, and then a portion of it is going to be towards what they call rental fees, or essentially the profit portion of the lease. 8, primary contrast is cash at signing. Typically in a buy here, pay here business model, that cash at signing is called the down payment, and it's just used to reduce the amount you would be financing. So a $10,000 finance transaction with $1,000 down payment, you would be financing $9,000. In a lease here, pay here scenario, you have the option of using it as a cash cap cost reduction, same kind of principle, reducing the total cap cost payable, or you can use it as a security deposit and avoid some of the tax implications associated with that down payment. So that tax implication thing is going to start to come back into the equation fairly often. Recycle of the vehicle, another major contrast. In a lease here, pay here business model, you can put the car with several customers during the course of its life, or you can put several customers in the same vehicle and essentially just keep recycling it. Your inventory is looked at more like a fleet. Take this customer out of that car, put them in that car. Take this car, put it over there with that car. Whereas in a buy here, pay here finance transaction, it's pretty much a standalone one-on-one transaction. You put Mr. Jackson in this vehicle, he drives it for 6 months, he fails to pay his note, you repossess the vehicle, you've got to look at the balance, charge off the difference, and that becomes your loss, and then you got to put it back in inventory, recondition it, do the whole thing, put it back out again. So that's what's why I called it more transaction-based business model versus a fleet model where you got a whole bunch of cars going out to different people over the life of that vehicle. Make sense? I hope. Okay, and then number 10 is federal tax. In a buy here, pay here business model, many dealers operate with what's called a related finance company. And so they sell their note to the related finance company at a discount in an effort to sort of defer taxes and make that work a little better. In a lease here, pay here business model, there is no need for a related finance company because of the way the taxes are earned and paid. Okay, so let's just take a look at some of the advantages of a lease here, pay here business model. We've already mentioned sales tax paid as payments are collected in most states. So if your state permits you to do that, that's a very big cash flow advantage. Down payment can be used as a security deposit. We've touched on that. No usury tax rules. And so when we get into talking about the Consumer Leasing Act and Regulation M, we're going to flesh that out a little bit more. But basically, there is no interest rate applied in a leasing transaction. It is a money factor that you use to calculate. Now, we can convert it to what we call an implicit interest rate, but the fact is there is no interest rate. You use a money factor. More on that later. Consumer Leasing Act and Regulation M disclosure requirements are a little more forgiving. in a lease here, pay here business model than they are in a buy here, pay here business model where you've got Truth in Lending Act and Regulation Z. If you're in buy here, pay here, you're probably very familiar with the regulations that go along with that. We've mentioned that lease here, pay here eliminates the need to have a related finance company. Advantage number 6 is, in theory, because the title is in your vehicle, you have bankruptcy protection. Customer can't include their vehicle in their bankruptcy filing. Well, they can, but you just are entitled to get it back easier if they do include it. Because the title is yours, or the vehicle is yours, you should be able to get it back. Technically, they're not supposed to be able to include it in bankruptcy protection. That changes or is different in a buy here, pay here business model. Depreciation deduction is become a big one, especially this year, where new tax regulations have allowed you to depreciate up to 100% of the vehicle value in the first year. It's complicated. I've had it explained to me by CPAs, and I said, okay, if the question comes up, I'm deferring it to you. Because there's all kinds of conditions and clauses and floor planning elements that affect that. But as a 30,000-foot view of this new tax regulation, it's very favorable to lease here, pay here, and the fact that you can depreciate the asset up to 100% first year. Reduced state and federal regulatory requirements, kind of touched on that. More flexible deal structure. I want to just stop on that one for a little bit. We're going to go into a cash flow profitability model here in a moment, and I purposely put in the brackets more variables. A buy here, pay here finance deal structure is fairly simple. You've got the cost of your car, you've got your reconditioning, you've got your gross profit, you've got your interest rate, and that all tumbles through to a payment. Okay. In lease here, pay here, there's a lot more moving parts, as you'll see in a minute. So you can look at that as, hey, that's really good. I can become very creative with my lease structure, or I could confuse the hell out of everybody that works for me or everybody that leases for me, and they don't know what's going on. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But there is a lot more flexibility in the deal structure. You retain ownership of the vehicle as one of the major advantages. And then number 11, I think, is a big one, and that is options at least N creates built-in renewal opportunities. So when this customer comes back after 24 months or 12 months or 36 months, they've got to make a decision. They've got to make a decision, depending on what type of lease that you've got, whether they're going to keep the vehicle, buy the vehicle, extend the vehicle, or give it back. You get a chance to see them. Buy here, pay here financing, you may never see them again unless they come back to pick up their title. And so I just think that's one of the built-in advantages of a leasing business model. Disadvantages. There are some. I want to show both sides of the equation. Consumers view leasing as complicated. Because they don't truly understand how the payments are calculated, and that there's a residual value involved and what that means and what their options are at the end of the lease, and do they own it or do they do not own it, it's just viewed as complicated. So it's something you need to be aware of when you are explaining or creating your lease here, pay here business model. I don't know how many times this has come up in our 20 group meetings with our lease here, pay here dealers. They still think they're buying a car. What do you mean I've got a payment remaining? I've got a residual. I thought I bought the car. We leased it to you. You show you here 17 times you signed and initialed. This is a lease. They still don't get it. So you have to just keep that in mind. That's why it's confusing and sometimes creates some challenges with the lease here, pay here business model. Lease here, pay here software, this has evolved a little bit more in the last few years than previous years. There weren't as many providers of lease here, pay here software. There are a couple out there now, and they're in the trade show hall. So if you're looking at lease here, pay here, make sure that you go and investigate who is providing lease here, pay here specific software. Requirements for full coverage insurance. In most cases, depending on the value or the price of the vehicle. Lower end vehicles, you may choose not to have full coverage insurance. Higher end vehicles, you might. But administration of liability insurance becomes a bigger issue. You want to make sure that your customers driving vehicles that are in your name have liability insurance on them, or at very least a provision to be able to force place insurance for your customers should their insurance lapse or otherwise. So a couple of considerations on the disadvantage side. Parking tickets and toll charges, nuisance things are sent to the lessor just as part of that fact that you own the vehicle. They're all going to come to you. And availability of capital providers. That has continued to be a bit of a challenge. There are a couple of providers out there that will look at providing capital for a lease here, pay here business model, but not in the same kind of volume or number as there are in a buy here, pay here finance model. And also a much smaller secondary market for lease paper. It's, I'll say, easier to sell your buy here, pay here pay here paper in the secondary market. A little more difficult, again, because they don't all understand how this payment goes together. What does it mean? It's a little tougher to get that secondary market to buy lease paper. Okay, so we're going to just flip the page and touch a little bit on the regulatory side of lease here, pay here business model. This falls under Regulation M, the Consumer Leasing Act. And by definition, Regulation M is a contract between the lessor, which is the property owner, and the lessee, which is the property user, for the use of the property subject to stated terms and limitations for a specific period at a specific payment. End quote. The CLA was put in place in 1976 to assure that meaningful and accurate disclosure of lease terms is provided to consumers before entering into a contract. So way back in 1976, they identified that leasing is a little more complicated. And there are a lot of variables to work with. And so they wanted to make sure that consumers were completely aware and completely informed of what goes into a lease payment. It applies to consumer leases of personal property. The reason I put that sentence there is it doesn't apply to business or commercial leases. So it does apply to consumer leases. And the CLA puts limits on balloon payments and regulates advertising. So you've got to be very careful with your advertising that you're putting out there as it relates to Regulation M and the Consumer Leasing Act. So let's just take a look at the two most common types of leases. Again, a 30,000-foot level. Many of you may already know this, but for those that aren't as familiar, there's open-end lease, which is a lease in which the amount owed at the end of the lease term, or that residual value, is based on the difference between the residual value of the leased property and its realized value. So it could be worth X, but it could be worth Y. How do you determine that? The consumer may pay all or part of the difference if the realized value is less than the residual value, or may get a refund if the realized. So what it says basically is it's undetermined what the customer might owe you at the end of the lease, depending on the mileage and the condition of the vehicle and when they decide to walk away. So open-end lease. Closed-end lease, on the other hand, allows the consumer simply to walk away at the end of the contract period with no further payment obligation unless the property has been damaged or sustained abnormal wear and tear. So there are provisions to say, okay, you can walk away from the lease at this amount, provided you haven't put excessive mileage on it, and there's usually a excessive mileage fee, or there hasn't been extensive damage or wear and tear to the vehicle. So there are clauses to protect the dealer from that happening. So for the dealers that are currently doing lease here, pay here, how many in the room are doing closed-end leases? 1, 2. And how many in the room are doing open-end leases? Ed? What was that? Oh, closed-end. You just forgot to put your hand up. Okay, good. So I'd say most dealers, as I suspected, are doing closed-end leases versus open-end. Just an informal survey. Okay, so not to get into too much detail, I did want to just mention that Regulation M is if an advertisement includes any reference to what they call trigger terms, and I'll tell you what those are in a minute, the amount of the payment, a payment of the capitalized cost reduction, such as a down payment, or any other payment required to or at lease signing or delivery, or that no such payment is required, then the advertisement must also state the following. So this is what trigger terms are. If you got this in your ad, you've got to say all these other things. You can't just say this, but not that. So in this case, it's talking about any amount of payment, capitalized cost reduction, such as down payment, any payment required at signing, you must disclose all the other things. And number one, that this transaction is a lease, and that the total amount due prior to or at lease signing or delivery, and also the number and amounts and due dates or periods of the scheduled payments, a statement of whether or not a security deposit is required. So what we're getting at here is Regulation M is really about full disclosure in your advertisement. You want to make sure that the customer is well aware of what they're looking at. A statement that an extra charge may be imposed at the end of the lease. This is primarily for open-end lease, where the lessee's liability is based on the difference between the residual value of the lease property and the realized value. Okay, it doesn't apply as much in closed. And that the lessor cannot use the term annual percentage rate, annual lease rate, or any equivalent term. So back to that, there is no real interest rate associated with a lease or pay here business model. Is typically referred to as a money factor. All right, I'm going to walk through a lease or pay here revenue model just to give you an idea as to how the cash flow works, how the revenue works, and especially how taking a customer from, or a vehicle from customer 1 to customer 2 to customer 3 can play out in a lease or pay here business model. So give me a second to just resize this so that everybody can see it at the front and the back. Come on. Do it again. Okay, is that on screen? Yeah. Okay, so I mentioned earlier there are a lot of variables. Everything you see up here in blue is considered a variable. And I could even put the ACV as a variable, and I could even put the residual value as a variable. All right, so lots of things to look at and plan and factor into determining your lease payment. So I'm going to go down to the bottom here where you've got the ACV. And to try to keep it as a buy here, pay here, lease here, pay here comparable, I'm going to use a pricing model that says ACV times 2 plus 1,000. Right? That's a very common buy here, pay here business model. Some lease here, pay here dealers use it, others don't. So let's just use that for example purposes. 5,000 times 2 plus 1,000 gives you a gross capitalized cost at the top of the page in yellow at $11,000. You could price that car at $9,000. You could price it at $14,000. It's whatever your pricing model is, and some of that's influenced by the money factor component that we'll get to in a minute. Okay, but for this example, $11,000. We're going to take a capital cost reduction, a down payment of $1,000. That's going to give us a net capitalized cost of $10,000. So far, pretty simple. The depreciation is, the residual value is going to be set at 30%, as you see down here. Another variable. It's going to be based on a 3-year term and a 30% residual. That gives us a depreciation amount, as you see up here, at $6,700. Now the rent charge. The rent charge is a combination of a calculation of your money factor and the profit margin that you want to make on the vehicle. In this case, I just used a $5,000 rent charge, calculating it through to give me a money factor that you can see here. That's a long number, 0.10104. Just follow me. So that depreciation works out to $186 of the payment. Is it 186? I have trouble seeing it. And the rent charge works out to $138, giving you a payment of $325. Or you could simply take the 11.7 and divide it by 36. You're going to get your payment. So if you're using dealer management software, this is an easy calculation. It does a lot of that work for you, but you've got to pre-program it to tell it what you want to do, what your money factor is going to be, what your residual value is going to be, what your pricing model is going to be, and this will all play out. Add your 7% sales tax in this example, and you've got a base payment of $325 plus tax and a total monthly payment of $347.75. Okay, that's year one. So at the end of year one, customer says, nah, I'm done, or you have to repossess or terminate, or you take it back, or whatever. So you say, all right, well, we're going to put this car out a second time. Let me just go back here. Okay, fit it on the screen. So now we've got this car back in down at the bottom at a residual value of an ACV of $3,000. Because it's been out on lease 1 year, we're only going to put it out for a 2-year term now, or this time. And we're going to price it at $8,500 at the top of the page. We're going to get $1,000 down payment. We're going to have a net capitalized cost of $7,500. We're going to give it a 30% residual value, again a variable. You could put in 25%, you could put in 33%. I'm just using easy numbers. Depreciation is a forced number at $49.50, and the rental charge, again, I kept the money factor number that you can see in orange consistent so that we could compare each column the same. So you can see that we're talking about a implied interest rate of about 25%. Very fair. So that's I'm keeping consistent, which is driving the payment to be $311 plus your tax, $332 a month. After 12 months, this customer says, you know what? I'm done. I want another car. Or you have to repossess it, take it back, whatever. You're now going to flip this vehicle to a third customer, right? One of the advantages of lease or pay here. So let me just put up that third scenario. Oops. And enlarge the screen. And bring it down. Okay. So now in the third lease, at the top of the page, we're only going to put this out for, again, a 24-month term because of the mileage and the year of the car, and I don't want to go too much further than that. I'm going to keep the money factor again to keep consistency between the three examples. So I'm going to use that 0.010 something. My car now stands me $2,000 as an ACV, so I've got to make those adjustments before I start to do my math and create a lease payment. Now I'm going to sell that car for $5,000. I'm going to get a smaller down payment because we've got less money that we're talking, and I get a $500 down payment. Net cap cost is $4,500. Residual comes out at $1,500 based on 30%. My depreciation rate at $125 of that payment, and my rent charge based on the money factor is $63 of that payment. Monthly payment is $188, as you can see on that last line, plus tax gives you $201. Okay, stop there for a moment. I just wanted to take 3 customers in the same vehicle and push it out to see what that looks like from a cash flow or profitability or revenue model, I should say. So now I'm going to go over to the right side of the page here. And this is where it all starts to make sense, I hope. Okay, so In each of the scenarios, we have a capital cost reduction, CCR, at the top. The first one was $1,000. The second lease was $1,000. The third lease was $500. So we get $2,500 of revenue coming in. Please remember, this is a revenue model, not a tax model. It's handled different when you start to talk tax implications. And in lease number 1, we have 12 payments of $325. Your payment income is $3,900. The customer left the lease early. We had an early termination fee of $500. And our gross income on that vehicle, or that lease I should say, was $5,400. To put that vehicle back on the road again, I'm going to spend $700 in reconditioning, so I'm going to factor that into my revenue model. Same vehicle, lease number 2. $1,000 cap cost reduction, 12 payments of $311 gives me $3,732 of payment income. This customer leaves the lease early. I get a $500 early termination income and gross income on that vehicle of $5,232, 12 months. Lease vehicle or lease term, or next time around, lease number 3, I get a little smaller down payment. The car's a little older, a little higher mileage. Lease number 2, by the way, I've spent a little bit more money on reconditioning just because it's a little older, a little higher mileage. So I threw in $1,000 of reconditioning in that second turn on the vehicle. And lease number 3, 12 payments of $188, net payment $2,256, early termination fee again of $500. We're earning $3,256 on that vehicle. So when you add those 3 scenarios or lease terms and put in your capital cost reduction of $2,500, you get a total gross income of $13,888. Everybody see that math? Your net payment total, your cap cost reduction total, and your early termination fee total. Take off the beginning value that you paid for that car. $5,000 was the ACV we started with. I'm going to just throw in the $1,700 in reconditioning. Some dealers might expense it to the car, tax implications, but I put it in here just to show the revenue flow. Your net income at $7,188. I take that car to the auction. I sell it for $2,000, which is what I had in it as an ACV, perfect world, and you end up with a net profit on cycling that car through 3 leases of $92, $91, $88. Much different than a buy here, pay here profitability model. Yes, sir. It's a good question. So I'll ask one of our lease here, pay here dealers to give us their opinion. Joe, how successful are dealers generally collecting an early termination fee if the customer's walking away? Joe's at the back of the room. He's a lease here, pay here dealer in Oklahoma. 50% of the time. Okay. Ed, what is your answer to that?
We don't have an early termination fee.
Okay. Yep. Sure. Okay. I think this lady over here was doing leasing. Do you have an early termination fee? And the question was, how often are you able to collect it? You don't? You do have a fee and you don't collect it, or you don't have a fee? Yeah. Okay, so call it money on the table, available. 50% of the time you're going to get it. They don't have it. She says, I get it when I can. That's what I said. There's lots of variables that go into a lease or pay here business model. Yes, sir. Excess wear and tear? Yeah. Joe? How often are you able to collect the excess wear and tear, mileage or otherwise? And if you have a security deposit, can you use that to defer your excess wear and tear? Okay? Now you know why I've got this Lease or Pay Here dealer panel tomorrow morning, to ask the tough questions. Exactly what I thought would come out of this. Yes, sir. Yeah. Well, I think it depends on the circumstances. If there's excessive wear and tear, you can use that security deposit to mitigate or pay a portion of that. If there is excessive wear and tear, the deposit goes back to the customer technically. So is there a limit to what you can charge for an early termination fee? Security deposit? Wash each other out? Right. Are there limits, Ed, do you know, on what you can charge as an early termination fee? Yeah, right. I think reasonable is usually the answer. $5,000 early termination fee, not reasonable. $1,000 early termination fee, reasonable if you can collect it. Okay, I'm going to take one more question and I'm going to keep moving through the question. But I will open it up for questions at the end. Yes, sir. Behind you. Go ahead. Which number are you referring to? Oh, sure. Yeah, I see on the previous slide. No, that's a number that's calculated. You're talking the first lease here. It's a formula calculation based on the cap cost of the vehicle and the amount that you want to earn during, or that the customer is going to pay as part of that rental cost. And that's that. No. Yes. Cash flow tax reasons. If you want to take it as a security deposit, you're not paying tax on it. If you want some money set aside for if it comes back with excessive wear and tear and depreciate, or wear and tear and something, you've got something to take back if the customer says, "I'm out of here, goodbye." So your call. He does it, they don't. He does it, they don't. It's just part of whatever business model you're comfortable with. Vicarious liability insurance, yes. So for the dealers that are doing Lease or Pay Here currently, how big of a factor is vicarious liability? Ed, do you want to take that one? Graves Amendment. Well, there's limitations, usually state maximums that you could be liable for, but it's significantly reduced because, or if your business is primarily in the business of leasing or renting vehicles. That was sort of the lid that they put on it to say, we've got to minimize the exposure of dealers or rental car companies putting cars on the road and then having lawsuits that are going to put them out of the business. So. Yeah, Graves Amendment is what you want to look at. That's going to give you your information. Most of the dealers I speak to say, no, listen, vicarious liability is not going to be a roadblock to me doing Lease or Pay Here where I am at. Okay, so let's just move on and take a look at some of the similarities between a lease here, pay here business model and a buy here, pay here business model. First of all, both are what I would call the finance business, finance or lease. Not necessarily the car business. It's putting together payments for customers based on your deal model structure and a payment they can afford. What car it is and what they end up driving is usually secondary. Second similarity is it's a collection business, not the sales business. Most of you that are on buy here, pay here have probably learned, no, this is not the car business. This is the finance business. We're about collections. The success of our business will come from how well we're able to collect the payments. Lease or buy here, pay here. That's the key. Number 3, this is the same customer. Whether they're financing with you or leasing with you, it's the same, I'm going to say profile, but type of customer. They typically can't get traditional financing or leasing. They need a vehicle. They need dependable transportation. They don't have a lot of down payment. That's your customer. It doesn't matter if it's a lease or a finance. Deal structure in the sense that you are the bank. You get to determine the rules. You get to put the deal structure together the way that you think is the best fit for your business and for your customer. How you mark it up, what money factor you charge, what gross profit you charge, what high-end or low-end type of car you're dealing with, that's your call. That's the similarity between the two. Underwriting is also very similar between the two business models. If it's the same type of customer, how you select the customers that you want to invite into your portfolio based on time on job, time in the area, time at residence, their payment to income ratio, and all those other factors remain the same, whether it's a lease or a finance customer. Collections, again, these are customers with damaged credit history. Your success in the business is going to be your ability to collect the payments, whether it's a lease or a finance. Capital requirements are still very much a part of either business model. They're both very capital-intensive business. Lease here, pay here may give you a little bit more cash flow advantage from a taxation or sales tax point of view, but they're both capital-intensive business. And then I think the other similarity between the two would be to get lease here, pay here specific training or buy here, pay here specific training. It's not likely you're going to find one that can teach both. I do both. I do a lease here, pay here training class and I do a buy here, pay here training class. Underwriting, collections, and deal structure, not deal structure, underwriting collections are very much the same in both. But how you build that deal, how you structure that deal, very different. So I'd encourage you to get specific training on that. Business analysis. What time are we done here? 5? Okay, I guess I should speed up a little bit. Lease here, pay here 20 groups. So you don't have to do this alone. You don't have to go in the dark, close your eyes, and try to find your way through lease here, pay here business or business model. We've got 20 groups for lease here, pay here dealers. The objective obviously is to analyze and compare how well your business model is doing. We've got a lease here, pay here specific composite or combination of business models reporting into the composite. It's a very detailed composite that covers off sales transactions, deal structure, operating expenses. It gets into lease termination, lease renewals, cash flow analysis. So it's a very lease here, pay here specific composite. There used to be a composite that tried to make a buy here, pay here composite look like a lease here, pay here composite. That didn't work out well, so we built a lease here, pay here specific. The idea behind a 20 group, for those of you that may not be quite as familiar, is to measure your business results against the other dealers that are in your group. They'll all be lease here, pay here dealers. You discuss real life business challenges. If you're not familiar with the 20 group format, you share ideas, you discuss best practices, you measure your year-over-year performance results and try to identify where your business trends are going. And then the other component that you have available for you if you're starting out in lease here, pay here, you don't have to close your eyes and walk in the dark. we've got training available for you. Our Lease Here, Pay Here training school is the newest addition to our dealer education lineup. Our next class takes place November 13th and 14th. It's a 2-day program and is designed to give you the key drivers to success in operating or running a Lease Here, Pay Here business. We look at challenges and opportunities of doing Lease Here, Pay Here, both from a customer point of view and from a business point of view. We look at marketing and promotion ideas and what I call the DNA of a lease payment calculation. How do you get that money factor to work in your favor? How do you determine your rental charge factor? We look at depreciation and residual value metrics, and we go through regulation and compliance in a fairly concise or a fairly elaborate manner. So that's another format available for you to help you. Key drivers to success in closing this out. Number one, you want to make sure that your state permits you to defer your sales tax as part of your payment. Number two, you need to be able to make sure you've got access to the capital it's going to require to keep your business model sustain your business model. Number four, you do need to have formal policies and procedures, a manual that's going to help guide your business, whether it's Lease Here, Pay Here or Buy Here, Pay Here, and our training classes can help you with that. It's important to have sound deal structure. Don't put the customer in too much payment. Don't put the term out there longer than the car is going to last. And don't use ridiculously high or ridiculously low residual values when it comes to your operation. Formal underwriting procedures, again, whether it's Lease Here, Pay Here or Buy Here, Pay Here, how do you determine what is the best possible customer for your Lease Here, Pay Here business model? What's the underwriting involved in that? Effective collections, again, documentation involved in your collection practices and having what I call a firm but fair theory or at least approach to your collection practices. Understanding of compliance and regulations issues and make sure that you're very consistent with how you're running your business operation. And back to our Buy Here, Pay Here specific or Lease Here, Pay Here specific training. And finally, I highly recommend now or in the short future, you're in Lease Here, Pay Here, you explore getting into Lease Here, Pay Here 20 group. And the final thing I'll say is I've talked to a lot of dealers and I've done the same thing, tried to do Buy Here, Pay Here and Lease Here, Pay Here on the same lot. It's a formula for disaster. Most dealers I talk to say do one or the other. Trying to do both is very difficult. So don't forget part 2 of this conversation. Our Lease Here, Pay Here dealer panel, Ask the Tough Questions, is tomorrow morning at 9:45 to 10:45 in the Venetian room. I know we ran a little bit long on time. I just want to say one last time, thank you for taking the time to sit through and be a part of this. I'll take questions if you have them. Otherwise, if you don't, you're free to leave. Thank you very much. Yes, sir. And I'll take questions from the floor and answer them through the mic. No, I said there's no interest rate per se, and there's no regulations or usury rates, which means it's interest rates essentially. So you can build a money factor that represents a 30 or 35% interest rate. See, best practices will tell you don't have a 35% interest rate if the state usury level is 5. First of all, you'll never see 35% because it's never shown. But if you build and calculate the money factor and it calculates out to a 35% interest rate, you're going to probably get yourself under the microscope and maybe in trouble. So the best practices says your money factor should calculate to not more than your state maximized interest rate. Safe.